We are about to interview Jackie Pullinger.
We've got Jackie Pullinger.
Jackie Pullinger.
Jackie Pullinger is a total hero of ours.
Go to them. Go as far as you can, loving the Lord your God and your neighbor. That's what the whole thing's about. If we don't, then we get hard-hearted. And we get used to the poor.
One of the ways in which you're like Jesus is you comfort the disturbed and you disturb the comforting.
Oh, what a good phrase. Yes, I don't intentionally provoke, but there is something in me that does stir, I know.
Tell us a bit of your story.
It was while I was at college. I sort of wasted my time, and I was going back on a train one day from a bad party, met some of my old boarding school friends who whispered to one another, "She really needs Jesus." Mercifully didn't say it out loud. They said a much smarter thing like, "Oh, we have these wonderful coffee parties every week in Kensington, and there are awfully nice men. And we talk about Jesus. Would you like to come?" So I was very much wanting to meet awfully nice men. So that's where I met the best man of all. It's deciding who he is. Because if he is who he says he is, it has to be your whole life. If he's not, don't bother. So I decided reluctantly he was the only way to the Father, which I didn't like much because I wanted to be broad-minded. And then I saw everything the other way around. Not a narrow only way, but a wide invitation for every man. And because my life changed, it was, now what am I going to do with my whole life? I said to the Lord, I only have one life. And I would not like to be ashamed at the end of it. I really like to answer well. How did you spend your life? Now I say to people, I think he's going to say, how did you spend my heart? After that day, when I realized who Jesus was, I began to pray about going. So I said to Richard Thompson, I think I'll stay in London and help you. And he said, no, don't. If the Lord's telling you to go, you must go. And I said, but I can't because I don't know where. And he said, why don't you get onto a ship, find the cheapest one you can that's traveling in the most different countries, get on the ship and pray to know where to get off. And it was like a bell went off in my heart. And I thought, oh, that is such fun. I would love that. So I said to him, that sounds wonderful, but surely it's cheating because missionaries have to suffer, and I'd love to do that. And he said, no, it's not cheating, and told me the story of Abraham. He said he was told to go, and he went without knowing where he was going and spent most of his life not getting there. So I found the cheapest ship I could, had all my vaccinations for countries along the way, and that's how I ended up in Hong Kong. I don't use feelings that much, but I found myself saying, as we sailed into the harbor of Hong Kong, thank you, Lord, for this place. It's the first one I've seen with perspective. I don't even know what that meant. So I was first in the queue to get off the ship, and then they wouldn't let me get off because they said I didn't have enough money. And I thought, oh no, I'm going to be put in the prison cell of the ship. And then I remembered what I'd read in the Bible that morning, which is your name's written on the palms of his hands. And I thought, oh, well, that doesn't matter. Maybe the whole purpose of this journey is for me to convert the jailer. If my name is in the palms of his hands and the nails went through, he certainly knows where I'm at. And I knew I couldn't lose. It didn't matter.
So that led you into the walled city of Kowloon, which doesn't exist anymore. But can you just paint a picture and how the Lord led you into that with a triad?
It was actually a city outside the law, even though it was inside Hong Kong, because when the British and the Chinese made the treaty in the 19th century about Hong Kong being leased, the British, from China. This bit was left out because they'd always had a separate Mandarin governor. So it was left out of the treaty. And a few years later, the British said, after all, we think we'd like to put this back into the treaty. And the Chinese said, what treaty? Feeling cheated in the first place. So the walled city became a place that was lawless and the police couldn't go in. First of all, it didn't look like a city. It just looked like a big block. All the buildings were built to join on the other buildings. And so there were just a few gaps in between, just 3 or 4 feet wide. So you had to squeeze in between the building, like going down a rabbit hole. It was squeezed in between the buildings, and it was dark because when I first went there was no electricity. There wasn't water. The whole place is a warren, but no rabbits, lots of rats. In its most congested time, there were about 100,000 people in about 5 or 6 acres. Because it was outside the law, this was also the place where people could do illegal things. And the gangs were 2 main triads there who controlled the opium dens, the heroin dens, the gambling dens, and the girls. I went in with a missionary and she asked if I wanted to teach at her school. I started to do that. The kids brought me in or out. So I learned the way. And because I was with the children, all the gangsters that were running the different dens, and there were some ordinary residents as well, but they saw me with the children and they all wanted their children to have a better life. So they were kind to me because I was with the children. It was full of sad people. Just outside was a very, very huge drug den where 100 people could take drugs at the same time. There was one single toilet where they used to pile up the bodies of the people who died in the night. If you walked down some of the narrow streets just outside the walled city on the way out, because I went in at the top, it was on a slant. You had to climb over the legs of the men sitting on either side of the little street, which was 4 feet wide, because they were recovering from their drug taking. And so I remember seeing this and seeing the old lady with needle marks on the back of her hands. And I learned later that she was a guard. She was guarding the young girls who had been sold, maybe 14 or 15 years old, into the brothels. I thought, dear Jesus, this would be worth my whole life if you'd use me to save just one. But the very strange thing was that from the first time I went in and for mostly ever after, I had this huge surge of joy, which is not rational. Later, I learned I'm in the place that I'm meant to be in. I've always thought that it's easier to do the will of God than not. It has to be. I mean, if you don't, you get swallowed by a whale or something. So what I learned very, very early on is that for me, the gospel is hardly words. Hardly words. It's mostly they're watching to see if you're anything like the God you're supposed to be representing. And the gang leader knew that. He was in charge of about 20,000 people. And when they messed up my place and smashed the windows and threw sewage and took things away, he said to them, you have to go back. And they said, we can't. She won't welcome us. We've ruined her place. And he said, she has to. She's a Christian. And 17 years later, he came to Christ, of course. I mean, of course it was in him. But, they're watching and they're expecting and they're actually hoping it's true. And I often think that with violent people, they're daring you to disprove Christ, or they're daring you to prove him. Because they deep down hope that's really true. It's so hard for people now. They're so untrained for the long haul. Our hearts need to be softened, not that we protect ourselves. Whatever it is that's made us hard needs to be softened. And I think what's made us hard is the availability of so much media, so we can see poor and hungry and bombed and raped and enslaved people, and we change channels.
Yeah.
We are numbed to the suffering of one child, let alone the whole world.
Yeah.
The first two questions in the Bible, the first one was from God to man, where are you? And then in the next chapter after, when Cain has killed Abel, God says, where is your brother? Am I my brother's keeper? Yes, I am.
Yeah.
I am. And I think that the Lord says, where is your brother? And people think, that's not my ministry. My ministry is leading worship, or my ministry is making cakes for tea or whatever. Whereas actually, where is your brother? And the lost and the hungry and the poor and the ill-treated are all of our responsibilities, because no other people have the heart of Christ.
Yeah.
We're the only ones, and nothing else would save the world. So the gospel's terribly simple. It's loving the Lord your God and your neighbor. That's what the whole thing's about. And we've tried to improve on it by sophisticated gospel preaching, when it's terribly simple. Drug addicts were coming because they'd met a friend, and they would say, why are you so fat? Because they knew that on drugs, you either don't have an appetite or you spend all your money on drugs. The friend would say, it's Jesus. And they'd say, okay, where is he? Well, he's in the walled city on Wednesdays and Saturdays. Or so, they used to turn up and say, okay, where's Jesus? They didn't know anything more. So I remember seeing this absolute wreck of a man, and we worship and we listen to scripture, and I always meet the new ones. And I looked at this man, and he's an absolute wreck. He's got scabs all over him, hardly any teeth. And I looked at him and I said, I don't know who you are, but you're like a diamond. And I couldn't understand why I'd said it. And later on, he came to introduce himself, and I said, where do you live? And he said, I was born in Diamond Hill. And
Wow.
what the Lord had shown me was that this absolute wreck of a man was a jewel. And that's the fun thing. If the Lord actually gives you eyes to see who somebody can be, not everybody can see that, but you can see you're such a special person. And of course, this is how he came to know Jesus and then got off drugs. Some of our people did a musical a few years ago about chasing the dragon. They did a wonderful dance in which the dragon is called Miss White. That's a colloquial term for heroine, is Miss White. And so Miss White is also the dragon. It was the visual interpretation of the seduction. She seduces men who want her and love her, and she promises much. But when they get her, she's only gives them a thrill briefly and then disappoints them. And so they are left hating her till they want her again. So this is really the picture of Satan, the dragon, who seduces us, who seduces men with promises, but it disappoints even if the thrill is there briefly. And so you try again to see if it's better next time. So when I wrote the book, Chasing the Dragon, it fitted into the Revelation where it says they overcame the ancient serpent. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And they did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. Describes what I find myself in, overcoming the works of the enemy, which Jesus did on the cross, but which he invites us to continue by loving people, by not loving your own life so much as to shrink from death. She had been sold when she was a baby. I later met her mother, and she said, I didn't really sell her. My husband left me and I couldn't afford to raise her, so I gave her to this woman who happened to be a brothel keeper in the walled city. And I just got $100 lucky money. When this girl grew up to a certain age, the brothel keeper said, now we're going to use you. She had come to my youth club a few times. And she didn't want to sleep with who other people told her to sleep with. She wanted to sleep with who she wanted to sleep with. So she ran away, and I didn't know how to find her. I'd lost her. So I prayed, and she called me a couple of weeks later, and she said she desperately needed help, and that she owed money to a loan shark. They will always lend girls money very easily, but they have to pay back a huge amount of interest. And she couldn't pay it back. And so the choice was to pay back $1,000, or she would belong to them for 2 years as a snake, they call it, which means she was involuntarily owned by them in a cage. So she said, "You have $1,000." And I said, "No, I haven't even got 100. I was thinking to myself, the only thing I have of any value was my oboe. Jesus Christ gave up his life for you. What's an oboe?" So I said, "Okay." Message received, sold my oboe. And I said to her, "I'll give you the money on 2 conditions. One, you let me hand it over, the loan shark, whose name was Michael, myself. 2, you consider a new way of life. And at any time, if you'd like help, I'll help you and get you out of where you are." She told me where to meet the people that were coming to collect the money. And when they came in, screeching of cars, and came in and slapped the table and took the envelope from me. And I said, no, wait a minute. This has gone too quick. And they said, "What do you want?" And I said, "I want to see your leader." And strangely, they let me. They said, "Okay, we'll call him." And they called him. He said, "All right, come to the 21st floor of this nightclub." Downstairs sat the men having drinks in round tables, and upstairs in cages were the girls, and they would phone up for the girls. So I went in and I said, "Okay, now I want to see Michael." And Michael appeared, and he said, "You think you're doing something great, don't you? Well, I help people. I help parents find their lost girls." And I thought, "Yes, I know you do, because you took them in the first place." And he said, "You think you're so great, don't you? He said, that money's wasted. She won't change." And I said to him, "It doesn't matter if she changes or not. You see, Jesus laid down his life for me, and whether I was going to say thank you or not. And I would rather pay for this girl and give her a chance for a new life than be hard-hearted and see her go to hell." And he opened his mouth to reply, and he was struck dumb. He couldn't speak for about 5 minutes. And then he said, "Have nothing else to say." And people want to know the end of the story. No, she didn't change. As far as I know. But that's not the point of the story. She was worth it anyway. It wouldn't have made it worth it if she changed. She was worth it anyway. And that's what people who are lost and sold and mistreated need to know. We're not just there to save their souls. We're there because Jesus died for them and they're worth it. That's it.